The loudest man in the room is always the weakest. Everyone knows it. Your boss, your enemy, your grown children. When you scream, you are handing them the exact blueprint of your vulnerabilities. But when you suddenly go silent, they begin to fear what is building inside your head. You have spent years believing that to defend your ground, you had to raise your voice. That respect was earned by proving you had the last word in every hallway argument, at every family table, in every disagreement with your partner. You wore yourself out. You woke up at 3 in the morning with your heart racing, reviewing what you said and wishing you had chosen silence instead. You are not alone in this trap. It is the invisible weight of a life lived entirely in reaction to the stimuli of others. Marcus Aurelius famously observed in his meditations that you possess sovereign power over your mind, not over external events. Realize this internal truth, and you will instantly find your true strength. The real structural problem in your life is not what they do to you. It is your almost infantile need to demonstrate to them that you are hurt through the medium of noise. When you respond immediately to a provocation, you cease to be the absolute master of your own destiny. You transform into a puppet whose strings are effortlessly pulled by anyone who happens to know exactly which behavioral button to press. Your sustained lack of verbal control has dug deep, permanent graves in your professional relationships and your personal authority. You have lost the hard-earned respect of those who surround you, not because you lacked logical arguments, but because you possessed an exhausting excess of words. Today, you will understand that silence is never a form of submission. True silence is the greatest demonstration of strategic contempt and unshakable self-mastery that a mature man can execute. It is a solid concrete wall where the chaotic insults of the rest of the world bounce back and turn aggressively against them. What follows in this analysis is not a simple behavioral lesson or a collection of superficial motivational quotes. It is the precise mechanical design of a mental weapon that will permanently change the rules of the social game in your absolute favor. We will systematically disarm those individuals who mistakenly believed they could destabilize your entire psychological foundation with a single, well-targeted phrase. To fully comprehend the clinical diagnosis of your current pain, we must first look directly at the root of your chronic fatigue. You are exhausted because you have spent consecutive decades trying to correct the flawed perceptions of people who fundamentally do not want to understand you. Every single time someone criticizes your performance at work or questions your structural decisions at home, you experience an immediate rush of adrenaline that desperately pushes you to justify yourself. That is the fatal strategic mistake. Epictetus, who was born into the brutal reality of slavery and died as one of the greatest Stoic masters of antiquity, used to argue that if you learn that someone has spoken ill of you, do not attempt to defend yourself against the specific accusations. Instead, reply simply that the speaker clearly does not know your other flaws, or else he would not have mentioned only those. Look closely at the profound psychological depth of that posture. There is zero rush to save the fragile ego. There is an internal acceptance so solid of one's own reality that the external attack instantly becomes ridiculous. Modern man, however, constantly seeks instant validation. You mistakenly believe that if you stay silent during a confrontation, others will assume you lost the debate. But the behavioral reality is exactly the opposite. When you justify your actions, you are implicitly assuming that they possess the rightful authority to judge you. You are giving them a voluntary tribunal inside your own life. Why do you fall into this emotional trap over and over again? Because you fear the empty space that silence leaves behind. You fear the uncomfortable tension generated in a room when someone throws a sharp hint at you, and you simply look back at them, without altering your breathing, without moving a single facial muscle. You would rather scream before holding that steady gaze of steel, because noise dispatches tension, while silence condenses it. If you continue to give away your words to those who only seek to wear you down, you will end up turned into an empty shell. You become a man who constantly reacts but never acts from his true center. The total lack of mystery in your reactions has made you completely predictable, and a predictable man can never be respected or feared by his adversaries. There is, however, a precise method to reverse this dynamic, a set of practical principles that will transform your verbal reserve into a magnetic presence. It all begins with the reconfiguration of your response to chaos. Principle 1. The tactical pause. When you face an aggressive verbal confrontation in a high-stakes corporate meeting or during a tense dinner, your primary obligation is not to speak, but to regulate your biology. Let 4 full seconds pass before you emit any sound. During those 4 seconds, the brain of your aggressor will actively begin to miscalculate. He fully expected an immediate emotional counterattack, but in its place, he found an empty, white mirror. He begins to sweat. He grows visibly restless. Stoicism teaches us that the specific interval between the external stimulus and your internal response is the only sacred space where your true freedom resides. If you reduce that space to 0, you are functioning as an animal. If you expand it deliberately, you are operating as a master strategist. Imagine a colleague attempts to openly minimize your project in front of your direct supervisor. Your habitual impulse would be to interrupt him with defensive metrics. The Stoic principle of the pause demands that you let him completely finish his sentence. Look at him fixedly during those 4 seconds of absolute silence, and then move directly to the next agenda item, as if his words had been nothing more than the background buzz of a fly. You did not destroy his argument with logic. You destroyed his social relevance with your posture. Principle 2. The emptying of the aggressor. Seneca explained in his moral letters that anger always consumes itself if it fails to find a solid wall of resistance to support it. When someone screams at you or purposefully tries to humiliate you, maintain your face completely neutral. Do not cross your arms. Do not clench your fists. Let them keep talking. Men who speak too much under the intoxicating effect of anger always end up contradicting themselves. They will willingly hand you the exact data you need to win the game in the long run, simply because you refuse to contain their verbal overflow. Think of an aggressive discussion with an unsatisfied corporate client who has completely lost his temper. If you lower yourself to his emotional level, you validate his lack of respect. If you maintain a sepulchral silence, limiting your response to a single calm nod when he finally finishes, you force him to look directly into the mirror of his own ridiculous behavior. Silence acts here as a natural emotional drainage system. He completely deflates, consuming his own energy reserves while you remain entirely intact, preserving your internal assets for the exact moment when strategic decisions must be executed with a cold mind. Principle 3. The economy of personal truth. Not everyone in your social circle deserves to know what you are currently thinking. The mature man understands that revealing his future plans, his specific political opinions, or his deep internal doubts to just anyone is a subtle, pathetic way of begging for societal acceptance. Epictetus insisted that a man should remain silent most of the time, or speak only when strictly necessary, and even then with extreme brevity. The truth loses its structural value when it is carelessly spilled into any casual coffee conversation. Bring this principle directly into your professional environment. When colleagues ask your opinion regarding the upcoming structural changes in the company, do not launch into a detailed analysis. Say the absolute bare minimum required by etiquette. We are currently analyzing the moving parts. Nothing more. Those who surround you will desperately try to fill your silence with their own wild speculations. In doing so, they will inadvertently reveal their hidden biases, alliances, and deep structural fears that you would have never discovered if you had been busy exposing your own cards on the table. Principle 4. The contempt of minor provocation. Throughout your day, you will cross paths with dozens of small, insignificant tyrants. The driver who insults you in heavy traffic, the sarcastic remark of an insecure neighbor, the email deliberately written with malice by a toxic supplier. Reacting to these petty stimuli is a miserable waste of your finite vital energy. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the best possible revenge against an enemy is to simply not resemble him. If you respond to a low-level insult with another insult, you have successfully transformed into his identical twin in that exact second. Imagine you are driving toward a highly important corporate meeting, and someone aggressively cuts you off, screaming profanities through the window. Your old, uncalibrated self would lower the glass to respond. Your new Stoic self does not even turn the head. You maintain your eyes firmly on the road, your hands steady on the steering wheel. That man does not possess an active existence in your universe. You do not grant him the sovereign power to alter your heart rate. Your silence is an absolute declaration that his existence is too insignificant to shift your peace of mind by a single millimeter. Principle 5. Silence as the anchor of family authority. This is a critical domain where many mature men fail catastrophically. When your adolescent children openly challenge the established rules, or when your partner initiates a sharp discussion based on the accumulated emotional fatigue of the day, your immediate survival tendency is to impose your authority by escalating the volume of your voice. You believe that screaming makes you look strong, but it actually exposes your total impotence. Screaming within the home completely shatters the infrastructure of respect and explicitly teaches your family that you are an easily destabilized man. Seneca wrote that no tree is firm or strong unless the wind frequently lashes against it, for in that very lash, its roots tighten and fix themselves more securely. Your home desperately needs a solid anchor, not another emotional whirlwind. The next time the tension rises in your house, do the unthinkable. Lower the volume of your voice until it is almost a whisper, or better yet, deploy complete silence. Listen intently without interrupting. Maintain a perfectly straight posture, and remain calm. When a father or a husband responds to domestic chaos with an unperturbable silence, the heavy weight of behavioral responsibility instantly returns to the other side. Your children will not see a weak man they can safely ignore. They will look at a solid figure, a mountain of stone that does not flinch before the temper tantrums of immaturity. Your silence will force them to moderate their tone. It is psychologically unsustainable to continue screaming at a man who looks back at you with total calm, respect, and absolute firmness. This exact principle applies when difficult strategic decisions must be made. If a financial or family crisis hits, the man who panics and complains out loud destroys the security of his dependents. The Stoic man retires to his study in absolute silence, meticulously analyzes the numbers, processes the psychological blow, and returns to the table with a concrete plan of action. There was no drama. There were no useless laments. There was only action tempered in the forge of reticence. Principle 6. The silent negotiation. In the world of business, commercial contracts, and complex workplace dynamics, the first person who speaks usually surrenders the structural advantage. Silence is the most lethal negotiation tool in existence because it generates a neurochemical discomfort in the counterpart that is almost impossible to endure. The average human being experiences a neurotic need to constantly fill any conversational void. If you maintain a cold silence after they present a mediocre proposal, they will automatically assume you are deeply dissatisfied and will begin to improve their terms before you have uttered a single syllable. Imagine you are negotiating your contract fees or the budget for a new digital project. They offer a figure that sits well below your expectations. Instead of complaining or launching into a speech about your market value, limit your entire response to looking down at the document on the table. Then look directly into the eyes of your interlocutor and hold a silence for 10 long seconds. Do not say a word. Do not shift your body. In 90% of cases, the other person will crack under the pressure, breaking the silence by saying something like, "Well, we could look at reviewing the margins if the delivery timeline shifts," or "There is an additional budget line we could potentially activate." They have just betrayed their own position. Your silence functioned perfectly as an organic lie detector and a natural extractor of concessions. Epictetus was right. When you systematically apply this concept in your daily work environment, you cease to be the predictable employee who constantly complains in the corridors about management injustices. You instantly transform into that enigmatic professional whose true intentions no one can accurately guess. Superiors naturally fear men they cannot read because they do not know if they are quietly planning to resign, if they possess a superior offer from a competitor, or if they are simply executing their strategy with a superior level of coldness. That subtle fear translates into a massive increase in your perceived value within the market. Principle 7. The internal processing of past pain. Many of the men listening to this carry the heavy, suffocating weight of disastrous financial decisions made a decade ago, conflict-ridden divorces, or the bitter betrayal of past business partners that still burns inside. Your error has been trying to process that severe pain by talking about it with anyone willing to listen, chasing a cheap form of social compassion that only serves to rapidly weaken your character. Stoicism demands that you bury the public complaint and process the event in the strict privacy of your own silence. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself during his brutal military campaigns, wipe out the imagination, stop the impulse, quench the desire, keep the ruling center in your own control. The deep pain of the past is never cured by venting it on digital networks or complaining to friends during the weekend while sharing a drink. It is permanently cured when you look at it dead in the eye, in the absolute silence of your bedroom at 11 o'clock at night. You accept that the loss was real, you assume your exact percentage of responsibility without self-pity, and you decide exactly what you are going to do tomorrow morning to rebuild your empire from the ashes. When you stop giving a voice to your misfortunes, they lose their active power over you. If you refuse to speak of them, they cease to exist in the present moment. They transform into simple, objective data points in your personal history, scars that prove you survived, not open wounds that continue to bleed in public view. Your absolute silence regarding your past traumas completely paralyzes your current enemies. They actively search for your weak points based on what you used to lament out loud. If you no longer speak about what you lost, if you show zero resentment toward those who crossed you, you strip the weapons right out of their hands. They will assume you have either become completely immune or that you have developed a strategy of vengeance so cold that it is safer not to cross your path. Your silence becomes your most impenetrable piece of armor. Principle 8. Mystery as a social magnet. The man who tells everything, who explains his tastes, his daily routines, and his immediate opinions within the first minute of meeting someone, becomes profoundly boring. He leaves zero space for natural curiosity. The human brain is evolutionarily wired to try to decipher what it does not fully understand. If you maintain a low profile, if you speak rarely but with surgical precision, people will naturally gravitate toward your orbit, desperate to discover what lies behind that facade of stoic calm. Seneca warned us that light and constant conversation dissipates the internal forces of the mind and accustoms it to permanent superficiality. Look at the social events you are forced to attend. While everyone else is aggressively competing to tell the funniest anecdote or the most exaggerated professional achievement, stay on the absolute margin. Observe. Listen closely to the raw insecurities that others project through their forced laughter. When you finally decide to intervene, do so with a single short sentence, dense and heavily loaded with meaning. I guarantee that the entire room will go dead silent to listen to you, simply because your words have become a scarce, high-value asset. Silence grants you the ultimate benefit of the doubt. A quiet man can be a concentrated genius or a highly dangerous observer. No one knows for certain until he chooses to act. You have lived far too long being the open book that anyone can carelessly flip through and discard. It is time to close the cover. You must force the world to exert real effort if it wishes to read your pages. However, mastering this tool is not just a matter of shutting your mouth when provoked or during a business dinner. There exists a crowning moment in the life of every single man, a critical turning point where silence ceases to be an external survival tactic and transforms into the rawest truth about who you actually are when absolutely no one is watching you. It is right there where the vast majority of men permanently shatter their stoic discipline and return to the self-destructive noise of always, without ever understanding the hidden danger they are unleashing upon their own lives. We have arrived at the exact point where the social masks must fall. Look at yourself in the mirror for a single second, completely stripped of the daily noise. What truly terrifies you about silence is not what others might think of you if you refuse to respond to their attacks. What terrifies you to the core is what you are forced to hear when the noise of the environment is turned off completely. When you enter your home at 11 o'clock at night, leave your keys on the table, and sit down in the dark of your living room, that is where the true judgment begins. In that absolute silence, you can no longer blame your supervisor for your professional frustration, nor your partner for the growing emotional distance, nor the government for your lack of financial advancement. In that empty space, the voices of your own omissions begin to speak with an ear-splitting clarity. You hear the ghost of the man you could have become if you had possessed the raw courage to maintain your discipline 5 years ago. You hear the long list of projects you abandoned halfway through because you lacked the stamina to sustain the silent, daily effort. The average man instantly turns on the television, opens a bottle, or endlessly scrolls on his phone to forcefully drown out those internal voices. He simply cannot endure the clinical diagnosis of his own reality. He prefers the external noise because it acts as a cheap anesthesia for his conscious mediocrity. But you are not an uncalibrated beginner. You have accumulated more than enough scars to know that running away from that silence is exactly what has kept you completely stagnant in this loop of frustration for the last decade of your life. Marcus Aurelius summarized it brutally when he wrote that nowhere can a man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul, especially if he possesses such things within that, by looking into them, he immediately enters into a perfect tranquility. But for that retreat to be truly peaceful, you must first clean the house. You have to stop using your words to build elaborate excuses in front of others and start using your silence to rebuild the very foundations of your character from within. Accepting the silence means completely ceasing to look for external culprits for your disproportionate emotional reactions. No one makes you lose your temper. You voluntarily decide to surrender the control of your mind in exchange for a single second of useless verbal relief. Every single time you fell into that trap, you sowed the discord you are harvesting today. It is an incredibly uncomfortable recognition. It hurts to admit that much of the respect you feel you have lost over the years was not stolen by your enemies, but given away by yourself, inch by inch, discussion after discussion, word after word. But within that exact wound resides your definitive liberation. If you were the one solely responsible for giving away your power through noise, you possess the absolute control to recover it starting this precise second through your stoic reticence. You do not need anyone to come save you, nor do you need to give public explanations of your change in attitude. Real change is never announced with trumpets or cheap motivational speeches on your networks. Real change is visible in the weight of your presence, in the absolute firmness of your gaze, and in the complete absence of urgency to justify your actions before those who have built absolutely nothing with you. Seneca reminded us that the wise man is entirely self-sufficient for a happy life, not because he wishes to be completely alone, but because he knows exactly how to be with himself when the world outside becomes a nest of empty provocations. Your silence starting tomorrow morning will not be born out of resentment, nor fear of speaking, nor a fake timidity. It will be born out of an unshakable internal sovereignty, the sovereignty of a mature man who has learned to look chaos directly in the face, to listen to the chaotic noise of the world, and to decide, with a terrifying calm, that none of those cheap words possess enough structural value to perturb the sacred temple of his mind. The noise of the world will continue tomorrow morning. The minor tyrants will keep screaming, the provocations will keep landing in your inbox, and the fragile ego of the weak will search for your reaction to validate their own existence. The question is never what they will do. The question is who you will decide to be when that storm hits your door again. If you are one of the few men who understand that control over oneself is the only victory worth pursuing, stay here. Join this space of reserve and mental solidity by subscribing to Aetron Mind now. Protect your inner blueprint. Let your silence execute the definitive strike. We will see you in the shadows of the next step.